Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the Book of Proverbs. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana. As we are beginning this study of the Book of Proverbs, this is the very first one, so thank you for being with us. We did a whole study on the Book of Psalms, Psalm 1 through 150, through all the years of COVID. Those are available on our YouTube channel as well. I'll try to put all of the Proverbs one in their own collection, their own channel, their own, what do you call them? Playlist. That's it. That's what I'm looking for. So that will kind of keep those separate if you want to follow along. We are going to be beginning with an introduction to the Book of Proverbs and also wisdom literature and really the Bible itself. And then we'll get into chapter 1 as we move forward. I have a bit of a cold, so please excuse that. If you'd like to check out our worship service that was live streamed from our sanctuary this past Sunday, I will put that link right up here. I think I got the hang of this now. Right up here. You can check that out as you are able. And thank you for being with us. Okay. The book of Proverbs is one of the most misquoted and taken out of context books of the Bible. Right up there with books like Acts and Revelation. People like to take what's in these books and then use them for their own purposes. Proverbs contains a lot of wisdom sayings. And they're very pithy. That is, they fit together, they're short, they're meaningful, and they're memorable. And people like to take them out of the context that they are written in and apply them in all sorts of ways, some correctly and some not. Proverbs is difficult because one verse doesn't necessarily follow right into the next. And so sometimes the verses themselves seem to be out of context. But I think if you look closer, you'll discover that there is a cohesive epic tale, a story that fits into the greater story, and then by that I mean history of salvation. And so the book of Proverbs, written primarily by Solomon, is really centered the same place that the rest of the Bible is. That is on the life, death, resurrection, and salvific action of Jesus Christ. So we're going to look for Jesus a lot. But before we do that in the actual text, let's talk about the Bible in general. A lot of people, when they say, well, I'm going to study the Bible, or I'm a Christian, but I've never really read the Bible, I'm going to start. They begin at Genesis, and Genesis really, the Hebrew word actually means beginning. So that is a great place to start. It literally begins before the beginning of everything that we know, right? And then it starts with creation and moves forward. People who are familiar with the New Testament, okay, the Gospels and then the Acts of the Apostles and then the epistles that come later, they might assume that because the New Testament is primarily chronological in how it is put together, that the Old Testament, since it begins with Genesis, follows the same pattern. That's not necessarily true. It does in some places, but the entirety of the Old Testament is not laid out chronologically, but rather it is grouped together into several different sections. Okay, now I'm going to flip over to this one. Okay, I've disappeared from your screen, but trust me, I'm still here, and hopefully you can still hear me. You see here on this imaginary bookshelf all the books of the Old Testament as we have them, and they are a little bit different, and you'll see them in different sections. So up there in the top left, you see the books of the law, what is often called the Pentateuch, the 5 books of the law, the 5 books written by Moses. So Moses wrote those first 5 books through inspiration of the Holy Spirit, because obviously he wasn't there for the beginning part of Genesis, right? Nobody was. Adam and Eve are closest, but they didn't write those things down. But Adam and Eve probably told their children what God had told them, what they had seen with their eyes, what they experienced. Adam and Eve lived for hundreds of years, saw generation after generation of their grandchildren, and passed that oral history down through the ages, and it continues to get there until Moses finally writes it down. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, primarily chronological, historical information, but are mostly concerned with God giving his demands and expectations and also promises to humanity. Okay, so those are the first 5 books. After that, beginning with Joshua, we enter what are called the historical books, the historical section. And so Joshua, Judges, Ruth, and then all the 1 and 2s. So 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther are primarily concerned with the history of Israel, all right? The history of God's people in the Old Testament. So that's where a lot of our knowledge about David's reign comes from, for example. And in fact, we are studying 1st and 2nd Samuel on Sunday mornings here at Redeemer in our adult Bible class. You're more than welcome to join us, 9:15 a.m., right between services. And we are in 2nd Samuel right now learning about David and the problems with his sons. His sons are killing each other because, well, they're sinners, and there's also some vying for the throne. So Solomon, who will write most of our book of Proverbs, is actually 7th in line of David's sons to be king. And that makes sense when we understand that the number 7 is important to God. It stands for completeness and holiness. So Solomon being the 7th son of David actually makes sense in that regard. But we have to figure out, well, why does the 7th in line get to have the throne? And the books of history record that. Then we have what are called the books of wisdom, or in this case, the books of poetry. Those terms are used synonymous. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, sometimes just called songs. These are not concerned with recording events per se, although they do reference events, historical people, places, and things that happened. And they're written by people, places, and in times of things that happened, of course, but they are concerned with delivering knowledge from God, or at least praising God in poetic form and describing the Christian life. So the Psalms are prayers primarily, but they're also teaching aids as we look to see how other people have dealt with their faith in the past and how they put that artistically to music in a lot of cases. Proverbs is a little bit different. It's not, as far as I'm aware, meant to really be sung in a liturgical setting, a church setting, but it's meant to convey wisdom, to pass it from one generation to the next. After those books of poetry and those books of wisdom, we have the prophets, and those are further divided into the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Jeremiah probably also wrote Lamentations, Ezekiel and Daniel, and then the minor prophets, Hosea to Malachi. That brings us up to what we call the intertestamental period, where God was silent for centuries. It wasn't because God ignored his people or anything like that. It's that he had said all he needed to say, and now in Malachi, he's just basically telling his people, hey, now just sit back and wait. The Messiah will come. And then, of course, we come to the book of Matthew in our Bibles, and we have that a proclamation that the one that we have waited for, that all these generations have been leading up to, was here, born in Bethlehem, and we begin the New Testament, the revelation that the promised one that all the Old Testament books were talking about has finally come, and what springs out of that. And then Revelation takes us to after the end of our world and a creation of the new heavens and the new earth. So if you look at the Bible as a whole picture of the human existence, it begins before we're here and it continues after, well, at least creation is here. We will continue on to live with Christ forever, of course. But the old will pass away. That we're told that the heavens and the earth will burn and melt, right? But don't be afraid, because God has a new plan for us. So when we understand that Genesis to Revelation is really a whole history of humanity, stretching from eternity to eternity, and the center of it is Jesus, then we have a better understanding of why the Bible is written, why it's arranged the way that it is, and it helps us learn those things. So we are smack dab with Psalms and Proverbs in that section of poetry and wisdom literature. That does not mean that chronologically this is going to match up with the books around it, okay? So Proverbs was written primarily by King Solomon, and we'll actually see that when, let's see here, let's go to this, and then here. So we see that right at the beginning, the superscription, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. So that's going to give us a date because we know when Solomon ruled as king. It doesn't say Proverbs of Solomon, son of David. So we wonder, well, maybe he wrote this before he became king. No, we're told that he, well, that's a good question, and that's probably confusing there. Is the king of Israel referring to David, king of Israel, or Solomon, king of Israel, or both? That's a good question. I didn't think about that. Anyway, we do know about this time then that King Solomon is writing his Proverbs around the year 971 BC, okay? So 971 BC, we're 1,000 years before Jesus shows up, okay? Now, Solomon will write the majority of the Proverbs that we have, but there are others. There's wise people that write them. There's the mother of King Lemuel that will write them, and there's another guy, I forget his name, it starts with an A, that will write some of them. All of that is completed roughly by 457 BC, okay? So the book of Proverbs, like the book of Psalms, is actually a collection of writings from multiple people, and the book says that, in itself. So it's not, we're not giving anything away. There was no ghost writers. They say Proverbs of Solomon, and in the case of Proverbs, this writing happened roughly over 400, 500 years. Okay. Primarily, there's going to be some pretty stark divisions in who's writing. So, for example, we know that Solomon writes Proverbs 1 through 9, and we would call that the introduction to the book. And so it's going to be, if we understand Proverbs 1 through 9, chapters 1 through 9, then we are going to be set up for the rest of the book. And all of that is claimed to be written by King Solomon. So that's the first section, Proverbs 1 through 9. The content of Proverbs, and let's come back here, the content of Proverbs is concerned with the giving of wisdom and the juxtaposition of wisdom versus foolishness, okay? And we need to understand this, and we're going to be returning to this topic again and again and again. Wisdom does not mean an ignorance or a knowledge of facts, and foolishness does not mean an ignorance of facts, okay? We're not talking about smart and dumb here, okay? Wisdom and foolishness are different than, this person's really smart, therefore they must be really wise. No, wisdom has another tangible quality to it that it has a practicality to it. You could be very wise about the knowledge of how a wind turbine engine works, but if you don't know how to boil an egg or make breakfast for yourself, you'll starve to death, okay? So we would say that somebody that starves to death because they don't know how to cook is pretty foolish, right? So they can have all kinds of knowledge. That doesn't equate to wisdom, all right? And in the Bible, wisdom and foolishness are particularly a moral, spiritual condition, okay? We're going to see that wisdom is really something that God gives, and the person who follows God is one who is wise, and the person who rejects what God has to say is foolish. The person who rejects God's way of living life is foolish. A person who rejects God's commandments is foolish. So when you hear wisdom and when you hear foolishness, and they're used a lot in the book of Proverbs, about 50-50, almost an even split. The words for wisdom and foolishness are in the book of Proverbs. So they're constantly being played against each other. But when you hear those words, Don't just think about intellectual knowledge. Think about morality, think about faithfulness, spiritual health. Those are really what we're terming wisdom and the lack thereof as foolishness, okay? This is different than the majority of wisdom literature that's out there in the world, both for about a century before Solomon starts writing. So wisdom literature is present in other cultures. We find this in Egypt, we find it in Syria, we find it in Mesopotamia, where they have the wise sayings of such and such a king or wise sayings of so and so, okay? Wisdom is always given this divine character. So people have always recognized that a very practical, beneficial knowledge is coming from outside of ourselves. It's a gift from elsewhere. The difference is, in those cultures, primarily, that wisdom is something that has to be discovered by heroic, successful, indomitable people, okay? So heroes that go on an epic adventure, Odysseus, okay? They learn something through the process, okay? And then as we contemplate those stories and we hear their experiences, maybe we can glean some of that wisdom for our own lives. But it was really Hercules who had to learn it firsthand, right? Okay, so that's how wisdom is portrayed, that it comes from outside of us, but it can be acquired by really good, awesome, special people who are determined. And then it might be shared with us lesser beings, okay? That's the view of wisdom out there in the world. Biblical wisdom, particularly in Proverbs, is going to turn that upside down. Instead, we're going to recognize that wisdom comes from the divine, but it's not something that humans acquire through their own method. Rather, it is something that is given freely to them by God in His Word. So God is going to continually tell people through the Proverbs and in other places that wisdom comes from the fear of the Lord, that He pours it out on people, He gives it to them, He has said in His Word. All of those are going to be themes throughout the Old Testament and in the New. And it represents a complete countercultural literature moment as God says, hey, I have wisdom, I will give it to you freely. Here it is. In fact, it's in this book right here, this Bible. I'll give it to you, right? And so what we're going to see throughout Proverbs is those that read the book, understand the book, listen to God, and take it to heart and do what God says are wise, and those who go, whatever, are foolish. It's not something that has to be discovered by heroes and then given to the rest of people. So, wisdom literature is in every, I can't say every culture, but all the cultures, most of them in that time. But the way that wisdom is presented or corrected in the Bible is countercultural to what's around there. And that makes sense, right? As this is true and those are falsehoods. And the falsehoods always spin it to put the focus on us. Religion always wants to put the focus on us. That's a false religion. The true religion, the gospel, the good news is that God gives everything. Okay? So even in Christianity, there's a lot of denominations which are all focused on you doing better, you doing A, B, C, D, E, and F, and hoping that's good enough for God above. But Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, celebrating 175 years, and I would say we go back all the way to the apostles because we're still proclaiming that beautiful message that God has done it all for you in Jesus Christ, and He gives it to you as a free gift. He pours it out. Jesus Christ is equated many times with wisdom in Proverbs. Okay, so a lot of the times when we're going to be reading about wisdom, we're going to be picturing Jesus because Jesus is the only person to ever do this right, and He gives that righteousness to us. Here's something cool. So the word for wisdom appears about 50 times throughout the book of Proverbs. The word for foolishness appears about 50 times throughout the book of Proverbs, so it's an even split. But there is one word that dominates throughout, and that's the word for righteousness. It occurs about 70 times in its various forms throughout the book of Proverbs. So as much as this juxtaposition between wisdom and foolishness is there, there's a greater focus on righteousness. And who is the one who is righteous for us? Jesus. So even here in the book of Proverbs, 1,000 years before Jesus is born in Bethlehem, we are still going to be talking and focusing on Jesus. So I hope you will follow along with me. I think that's about everything I want to say for the opening and the introduction. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to reset my notes, and then we'll come back and we'll actually look at chapter 1 of Proverbs. All right? So be with me on the flip. See you then. All right. Hopefully that recorded well. It's my first time using this equipment in a long time since we stopped online Bible study for Lent because we had services at Lent, you understand. But thank you for coming back. Really appreciate all of you that have mentioned that you do look forward to these and that you do pay attention at home. I'm flattered by that. And I'm glad that you're in the Word. I'm glad that you're studying along with us. All right. Let's look at chapter 1 of the book of Proverbs. We've already discussed how there are the Proverbs of Solomon, the king of David, the king of Israel. So we do have a similarity in what we just talked about in the introduction, that Solomon is set up as sort of a hero. And Solomon was well known for being wise, which is probably one of the reasons why people wrote down what he said. God gifted Solomon with wisdom. You remember that Solomon actually prays for it. And God says, because you have asked for this and not for wealth or property, I will give you even more than you expected. But his primary concern was wisdom. So everything that Solomon accomplished, he attributes to that gift of wisdom from God that he had. And in that way, he's very much like David. That David set himself apart from Saul because where Saul claimed all this glory for himself, David, time and time again, always said, God is the one who has done all this, okay? And so David could be prone to arrogance and selfishness and all that too, but in his writings, you see that he's at least in his mind always saying, no, it's God who's doing this. It's God who does this. We have to give him glory. So Solomon, even though he was accounted as very wise, he would be the first to say, well, I got that from God. It was a gift from God. So again, that distinction between wisdom is not something to be acquired by humanity. Rather, it is something to be gifted from God, is set up from the very beginning. Verse 2, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So we see a break here, and that's important. So we're going to stop right there. I'm going to hide that last verse, because what is being set up here is an introduction to this whole book, and it gives you its purpose, okay? We're going to be imparting wisdom and instruction. That's the purpose. These things will lead to righteousness first and foremost, and from that also will flow justice and equity. For those who are saying that are not as well versed in wise things, naive, we might say, it will increase their wisdom. It will give prudence to the simple. And particularly young people will give knowledge and discretion to the youth. We're going to talk about Laertes and in Hamlet just a little bit, because so much of this reminds me of that. I'm going to be geeking out over Hamlet and Shakespeare probably throughout this whole study. So I'm sorry. And I'll tell you right now, You really should go watch Kenneth Branagh's 1996 Hamlet film. It's really worth the 3 hours invested. You're like 3 hours, like yes, but it's done so well. So anyway, we'll get to that. But Proverbs are meant to impart wisdom to children, particularly. But there's something for other people. Let the wise hear and increase in learning. People who are smart know that there's always, or I should say, people who are wise always know that there is more to learn and more ways to grow. They never assume that they've reached the pinnacle of knowing everything, right? That would be foolishness, okay? So there's something for everyone here in this book. The one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb is saying the words of the wise and their riddles. Other places it might be translated as enigmas. The word here in Hebrew, that riddle or enigma, does not have a positive connotation, at least to those who are foolish. And that's where we kind of lose something in the English. We have to translate this. If I'd say, I'm going to tell you a riddle, you look at it as just a little mental challenge, right? Like, well, either I'll figure it out or I won't, right? What's black and white and red all over, right? And if you think about it and you go, oh, it's a newspaper. I've heard that one before. And kids today look at you and go, what's a newspaper, right? So riddles in our context, they don't have a negative connotation. They're kind of neutral, right? Enigma, it's just something that I don't understand. It's hard, it's difficult to understand. The Hebrew word here has more of an idea that if you are already wise, a riddle and an enigma can be a puzzle, a joyful thing to figure out. But if you are foolish, then a riddle and what's going to follow is really going to make you feel, seem, look dumb. Okay? There's a real division here. And that's one of the reasons why I picked this image that I found online somewhere. Thank you, whoever made it. Because what we see in Proverbs is this real division. Are you wise or are you foolish? And what you think is wisdom is not really wisdom. We'll see that in other places in the scripture, that the wisdom of the world is foolishness to God, okay? That the wisdom of the cross is folly to the Gentiles, to people who don't believe it, okay? So we're really going to see a divergence between the wise and the foolish. And so I really like this image of these two roads that are quickly departing. And we're going to see that throughout Proverbs. Which road are you on? And why do you think you're on it? That's the question to continue asking yourself on your spiritual journey. Solomon is going to reveal the key to doing it right. And it's here in verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, for fools despise wisdom and instruction, and we might add, from the Lord. So again, wisdom in the biblical sense is something that is given by God through his word. Whereas in the secular sense, out there in the world and other places, people think it's something that they acquire of their own doing. And so if I'm wise, you say, well, you're going to teach me, let's say, here we go. All right, so I'm doing some plumbing to help out Ascension Lutheran School in Gary. I have some handyman skills, and I saw something I could fix, and so that's what I'm doing. So, but imagine if I was, a semi-professional plumber, right? And now you're going to teach me a better way to take off that valve, all right? And you're going to say, you don't need this big wrench. You can use one of these, right? Yeah. You don't need this. You can use this. And I'm like, you know what? No, that's dumb, right? So if I was a wise person, I might acknowledge the fact that there might be something that I don't know. And so I'd say, yeah, hey, sure, let me see it, right? might learn something, might find a new tool. But if I was foolish, I would say, no, tried and true, I don't want to even look at something, right? And that's how people and industries get left behind. So, when we look at what Solomon is saying here, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It's not, nobody has it all, right? So just by saying the Lord knows what he's talking about, and that's where we need to get our wisdom and instruction from, okay, that's wise. But those who think they have it all figured out through their own experiences, they've acquired wisdom themselves through the school of hard knocks or whatever it happens to be, or they've read all the great literature of the world. They're going to look at the Bible and go, this ancient, dusty old book, what could that possibly teach me? What could that possibly get right? Well, everything, because it's written by the one who set everything right. And I'm not talking Solomon, I'm talking about the God that gave Solomon the wisdom to write these things. Okay, so Solomon's premise is that wisdom, true wisdom, comes from God. And if you want to be wise, if you want to be on that path to wisdom and righteousness, the fear of the Lord is how you start out on that path. If you're going to read what comes after this and go, whatever, dusty old ancient book, you're on the path to foolishness already. If you think wisdom is something you're going to acquire yourself instead of receive it from God, you're already on the wrong path. All right, so we'll see that divergence. And the question for us is, where are you? Where are you on that path? Or are you today committed to starting with me down the right path as we look at the fear of the Lord and the beginning of knowledge through the Proverbs? I think I know. So, verse 8 begins a new section, and it will be the first of 10 calls for the writer, Solomon, to his son to listen to his instruction. Now, Solomon obviously had kids. Is he writing to his own kids at this point? I would say, yeah, but he's also envisioning all of us. Solomon knows he's not just writing for his own family. He is writing for all the generations to come and all those spiritual children who share his faith in the Redeemer. Okay? So this is us. And so when we read, "Hear my son," we can hear Solomon speaking to us. "Your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. They are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." The wisdom of elders, particularly parents, passed on to children, is something that adorns their life and improves their life, which is why fourth commandment says, "Honor thy father and thy mother." We will find that most of the wisdom as it pertains to what we are to do in the book of Proverbs goes back to the Decalogue. And by Decalogue, I mean the 10 Commandments. It's amazing. So that summary of God's law is the beginning of wisdom. And so if we are looking at how we to live a righteous life, go back to the 10 Commandments, okay? In Lutheranism, we talk about 3 functions of the law. This is for my confirmation students, okay? Okay, we're getting prepared. Remember that the law of God operates as a curb, all right? It keeps us from doing what is wrong. I'm not going to steal that because God said that's wrong, okay? So that's curbing my sinful inclination. It serves as a mirror to show me that I need Jesus because I don't always do. Sometimes I hop the curb a lot. So I need somebody to redeem me. I see myself in the mirror of what I'm supposed to be, and I recognize that I'm not there, and I need somebody to fix that. That person is Jesus. So the law operates as a curb, a mirror, and the third one, depending upon how you were taught, is either a guide or a ruler. Okay? It tells us how we are to live. So what do I do as a Christian? What do I devote my time to? How do I make decisions? The beginning of wisdom is to go back to the 10 Commandments because they are a summary of God's law, and that is wise in Solomon's presentation. "Hear, my son, your father's instruction. Forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason, let Sheol, like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, we shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us, and we will all have one purse.'" So Solomon here is envisioning a group of ruffians who are trying to lure his well-behaved son off to do their dastardly deeds, okay? This will appear, I don't think I wrote that down. Here, let's do this. It's 1 Corinthians 15. And it goes down all the way to like the 30s here. Yes. Paul is writing to the Corinthians. He says, "What do I gain, humanly speaking, if I fought with beasts at Ephesus, if the dead are not raised?" So he's proclaiming his belief in the resurrection of the dead, and particularly the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. People say, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. Let's live only for the moment," is what people are saying. And then he says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." All right? This is a proverbial saying. Okay, it's a proverb. It's a wisdom saying that's stuck into Paul's writings here. Bad company ruins good morals. We all would say that to our kids, right? Don't hang around with those kids. They're bad news, right? That's what parents do. So we see Proverbs 1 echoed there in 1 Corinthians 15, this wisdom. Where do you think Paul got that wisdom from? Well, he was probably acquainted with the wisdom of Solomon, and he's paraphrasing it in his own writing to other people. So Solomon envisions this group of ruffians trying to lure away his son to do what is unrighteous, and it sounds good, all these promises, right? "My son, do not walk with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood." Fifth commandment. "For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird." I have no experience trapping birds, so I'm just going to assume that Solomon is right here. If he says you sit in front of the partridge and you lay your net, the partridge is going to look at you and go, "Yeah, I'm not stepping foot in that net. Nice try." That's what Solomon is saying. "These men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives." This is as close to the Hindu, I think it's Hindu, concept of karma that you're going to get, okay, in the Bible. People believe in karma. Oh, a bunch of nonsense. You reap what you sow. That's biblical. They set an ambush for their own lives when you try to cheat others. That's biblical. So here we see this. They think they're getting ahead, but really they are just murdering themselves. "Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors." It's like poison. All right? So here we see Luther's explanation to the commandment: we do not steal, nor do we try to get something in a way that only appears to be honest, but is actually dishonest. It is poison for us. Again, the Proverbs go back to the commandments. Verse 20. "Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets she raises her voice." Okay. We need to pause here. Wisdom here is given in the feminine sense, all right? And we'll see that happening a lot. However, there's other places, even in the Book of Proverbs, where wisdom is masculine. In this case, however, in most of the cases, we're going to see it's feminine. Now, this has caused some confusion because in other pagan religions, wisdom is worshipped as a female goddess, okay? Particularly in Baal, okay? So the Canaanite religion, the worship of Baal or Baal, he is the male deity, and then there is a consort, a female deity, who is sometimes personified as wisdom, all right? Gnostic heresy, all kinds of other false religions spring from this. And they all have that idea that the gods are fashioned after us, male and female, and they have the same concerns. Really, that tells you, hey, we're only just worshiping ourselves. Okay? So wisdom cries loud in the street. She raises her voice. Solomon is not trying to borrow the pagan idea of wisdom and Christianize it. The reason why he does this is because wisdom is a word that appears in the feminine case in Hebrew. Like other languages, I remember Spanish in particular, that the word for book, libro or libra, depending on if it's an O or an A, determines whether it's a masculine or feminine. Well, books don't have a gender, right? But in language, they are given one for whatever reason that may be. And sometimes you can imagine that. So like let's say a sword is a masculine word, and it appears in the masculine case. And you go, okay, well, men generally fight, and it's violence, so those fit masculine qualities, right? Maybe we can do that. But there's other places where it's like, I don't understand this. Wisdom in Hebrew is a feminine word, and so that's why it's spoken of as her voice here. Not because Solomon is just trying to Christianize the pagan worship of the wisdom goddesses around him, okay? In the market, she raises her voice, meaning that she appeals to everyone. Wisdom is available to everyone. It's not something that those heroes have to acquire. God is going to give it. He goes out into the public and proclaims it. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates, she speaks. Every place where all the people gather, God is saying, listen, I am going to tell you what is right. Who is going to listen? That's the question. So here's the question that wisdom asks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? Again, knowledge isn't just intellectual facts. It's the fear of the Lord. It's submission to the Lord. It's obedience to the Lord. It's love of the Lord. It's trust in the Lord. It's clinging to the Lord's grace. All of that is wisdom and knowledge. If you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. And that's so important because God does not hide his wisdom. Rather, he gives it. He sets it out. He sends preachers to proclaim it. You can hear God speak in any church within 5 minutes from your house, most likely. There's a lot of churches that don't actually proclaim the scripture in its purity and truth. But more than likely, there is a faithful Bible preaching congregation within 5 minutes from your house. You can go and hear what God has to say. You can pick up your own Bible. You can read it online. You have access to what God actually says. And we don't do it because we think we have stuff better to do. All right? I will make my words known to you. You don't have to seek them and find them on some mountaintop or slay some beast to get them. I will give them to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, I have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. Here's the consequences. I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, would have none of my counsel, and despised all my reproof. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their way, and have their fill of their own devices. This is some really harsh language coming from God, wisdom, right? But we have to remember that God is just. And he will not control us against our will. He wants everybody to be saved, to believe in Jesus, to go to heaven, live with him forever in a new heaven and a new earth after the judgment. He wants that. but he will not force people to believe when they reject him. Why? I don't know. Straight up, I don't know. That's the thing to ask God. I don't have that answer. He's like a parent, I guess, right? Sometimes your children are going to do dumb things, and as much as you wish you could make that decision for them to choose the right thing, you all your pleading is going on deaf ears. And so, all right, go ahead, learn. All right, you think you can drive your car without doing an oil change, except for once every 12,000 miles? All right, kid. If they bought their own car, that's fine. But if you're buying it, then like, no, give me that car. We're going to change the oil at least every 6,000 with synthetic, whatever you're going to say. Why does God let us make stupid, boneheaded decision? Why does God allow us to reject him? I don't know. But he loves us not to control us in that way. So, if we reject him, there is a natural consequence. If we cut ourselves off from the source of life, the only option is death. There's not another source of life to connect to, okay? Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches, okay? If we separate ourselves from that vine, there's not another vine over here that we can latch onto. We think there is. Science, experience, this life is all there is, the wisdom of the world. But we'll find that that vine has no sap. It has nothing to give us in the long run. And we're cut off, and so death is our only option. All right? So there are natural consequences to not doing things God's way. And because we have chosen them, God will let us go and have what we want. That's what he's saying here. And it's terrifying to hear God speak this way, that I will laugh at you. I will mock you. That's God's heart of wrath, his anger and annoyance and everything about when his children choose a path that leads only to death. That's part of what he feels. So we're seeing a picture of the heart of God here, and he has wrath and disappointment and all those negative feelings are there. And that paints a difficult picture for us as Christians, but let's keep looking. All right? They shall eat the fruit of their way, have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But look here, at the very end, there is this redemptive statement. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. All right? So, God is saying there's two ways. You can go my way, or you can go your own way. My way leads to life. Your way leads to death. Those are the only two options. All right? And so we might say, oh, it's up to me to choose and do and stay on this path. That's where a lot of people get Proverbs wrong. Okay? Proverbs is primarily concerned with sanctification. That is, the living of a holy life after one has been justified. Justification and sanctification are two theological teachings that we get from the scriptures. Justification concerns itself primarily with how we are made right with God. Sanctification concerns itself with how we then live out our lives here on earth until God comes and takes us to be with him forever. Okay? Justification comes first. It has to. How are you made right with God? Jesus died for you. Not, I've kept all the commandments, I'm such a great person, I give my money to the poor, I go to church. No. That's all sanctification. Justification is concerned with how are you made right with God? Who has taken away your sins? How can you stand justified before God? And the answer to that is always the same. Jesus died for me. Now, what did you do for Jesus to die for you? You weren't good. You didn't pray for it. He did it before you were ever born. You did nothing for Jesus to die for you. It's all gift. It's all grace. It's all his love for you, doing for you what you couldn't even ask for because he loves you that much. Justification is pure gift. It's all God's doing. You can't mix any of our own doing into it because then you're going to screw it up. God does it all, and he does it perfectly. Now, since we have been justified freely by God's grace, we still have a life to live here on earth. What does that life look like? Striving towards holiness. Not because we hope to get into heaven, already got that. Not because we hope to have our sins forgiven, already got that. Not because we hope to live with God forever, already got that. That's all justification. We do it because we are made new, because it benefits our neighbor, because it's in our best interest, because it's pleasing to God, and because it is right and it is wise. So, forgiving my neighbor when he defrauds me, being generous, being kind, speaking well of others, going to church, praying, helping out the poor, right? Watching my language. All of that falls into sanctification, that living of a holy life, at least striving. Can we do that perfectly? No. What do we do when we fail at the sanctified life? We go back to the justified life and we realize I'm forgiven because Jesus died for me. What did I do for that? Nothing. It's all grace. It's all gift. Thanks be to God. Now let me go out and continue to try to be holy. That's the life. So when you read Proverbs, we are primarily concerned with the sanctification of how we live out our lives. The justification is all Jesus, all gift. All right? We do not earn Jesus by doing all this good stuff that Proverbs is going to talk about. Okay? So when we read, let me go back to the text here. The simple are killed by their turning away. The complacency of fools destroys them. Whoever listens to me will dwell secure and be at ease without dread of disaster. What does God say in his word? He tells us the account, the history, the story of Jesus Christ given for us, crucified and resurrected for our justification. Okay? All right. Thank you for studying along with me. I hope that you learned something about this and are excited for what we will discover in the book of Proverbs. We will return to a lot of these themes over and over again. You're going to hear me talk about justification and sanctification, about wisdom and about foolishness, about the righteousness of God, about the grace of Jesus Christ. We're going to be talking about Solomon writing in the present, but also writing for who all ever else is yet to come, so on to the future. A lot of really cool stuff here in the book of Proverbs, and I think that if we have a proper understanding of how it was written, how things are arranged, how they fit into the greater teaching of the Holy Scripture, then, after we've done all that work, then we can take these wonderful, pithy sayings of wisdom and try to apply them to our own sanctified lives as we live with each other until the Lord comes again. Thank you for joining me. If you like this video, subscribe, like, whatever you have to do down there to get notifications that, I think it's right down, maybe this side? I don't know. There's like a bell or something that you have to click. I'm not very good at this YouTube thing. But subscribe to our channel, and every time we post a new video, it'll come up. I will try to do this every Wednesday. We'll see. I still got to upload. Thank you for studying. God bless you, and I will see you soon.